Well, we're talking about, wind and setting up tents and how we deal with an outdoor shoot in the wind. I think, first thing we've all learned it kind of the hard way. I know it's tough, but if we go indoors, we don't have to have this discussion more about that. So, selling indoors is the best way to do it.
I thought that if they had the whole
Second,
thing, then they would be able to see the whole thing.
site survey is imperative. I've been to numerous areas where we haven't always done the best site surveys. Went out there expecting to set up 4 tents at 5:30 in the morning and, gun ho ready to go. And half the time there's been these big, beautiful, what do they call them, Chris? Pavilion. These big, beautiful pavilions. Now, you gotta be careful. That's why it's imperative you do your site survey. Some of these pavilions will have those tables bolted down, you can't move. Those are no good to us. But if we can move that table, now we have a nice, secure, cemented, permanent structure that we can either set up without a tent, and in that case, the biggest consideration, you guys just talked about light for an extended period of time, is the sunlight. Or we can be able to block the sunlight with tarps. If we can't, then we have a nice, beautiful structure that we can set up tents in and be secured and protected from the wind. Okay? So again, imperative when you're setting up, or when you go out doing that site survey after you sold a lead, going to the location, take advantage of what you have available to you. Okay? The next thing, there is no pavilion, or there's a pavilion, but all the tables are bolted down. Okay? Never, and I know the thought process right, I've been there, I've had this thought process. Well, the parking lot's right here, the parents have to walk right here to get to the games, so let's just sit out right here in the middle of the field, fully exposed to the elements, because I don't really care. The number one concern to me is getting as many participants in my tent as possible. I'm not thinking as much about the elements, okay? And even before that, excuse me, I should step backwards. The function that we now have on our application, look at the weather, have a full understanding of what the weather is, where is my wind coming from. It'll tell you on there you're going to have gusts from the southwest at 10 to 15 miles an hour. People have a strong eastern wind, okay? Or excuse me, it's a western wind in the morning, okay? Now I'm kind of in a predicament here. So now I'm going to probably have to face my tent either north or south and try to really feel in case it's a true eastern wind. Is it saying it's going to be west, and then it's going to be, west by northwest wind? That information is available on those reports. And from there, we don't, wherever that wind's coming from, we want to try to angle away from it. We want to be away from it as much as possible. So it's either coming in on the side, coming in on the back corner, coming the back, side, back corner. Okay? So we have plenty of options, and think these things out as you're doing that. Next, who hates plywood? Who hates carrying setting up the plywood? Okay? Who hates that? You know what? On a windy day,
We never need it.
and you're lucky in the South, but there's places, Kansas City, Utah, some places in Texas, that you just have to use it. Okay, it's just part of it. And I'd much rather haul, those sheets of plywood, 12 sheets of plywood out and put them back, and I can usually bring that trailer right up pretty close to where I'm setting up, than have to chase my tent, blowing down the street. Because first of all, it's a lot harder to, we can tie the cars and tie to our trailer, but I think the stake's the way to go, but it's very hard to drive the stake into concrete. It doesn't really work, and your lead might get a little frustrated with you. And then just the plain, physics and the friction and what have you. This thing slides pretty good on cement, but it tends to sink a little bit in the grass, and you're not going to get as much movement. So as much as we dislike carrying the plywood, in windy conditions, we're better off going ahead and taking that extra few minutes and setting up
Well, I
that
think
plan.
it goes back to the site, because a lot of times you have very little choices. You
Yeah.
know, for instance, when Maury and they had set up in Texas,
So
that part was, that was it. It was a parking lot or nowhere. So it definitely dictates choices when they say, this is where you have to shoot. We've seen that before.
Oh, yeah.
This is where you have to shoot. You look at it, it's a 10 by 10 classroom.
We've been there, we've made it work. But, you know, if we are in situations like we did have in Texas where we had to shoot on the sidewalk on a windy, or on concrete on a windy day, you have a, 14, 15 foot trailer. You can put 2 studios, one on each side of that thing, and maybe even one in the back. Anchor it down into that
You might
trailer.
focus too to maybe push to the back of that concrete where you do have a little
Exactly.
grass, you can pull some stakes back.
And we did that in Kansas City. We were on a concrete surface, windy day. We went all the way to the edge, and we staked the back of the tent down really well, and we overweighted the front of the tent. So it worked out, pretty well. You'll always have obstacles, but within obstacles, there's always opportunities. So the more you can be creative and think, well, shoot, I have to shoot here, but I can go right here and push the edge, and then right there's something I can
Some grass.
go against.
A lot of times too, think about basketball posts, light posts.
Yeah, I'm
all
gonna get
these
into that here in a
things.
second too. But like Rick's saying, and we did tie to some posts. If you go to a large park, they usually have tennis courts. Okay, and you're really lucky if they have weeds and stuff in them because the people don't care as much. Remember we went to Colorado. They actually just resurfaced their tennis court. They got a little mad at us. But pretend like this room being a large tennis court. There's 4 corners to set up studios with high fences where I can secure 2 sides of each of my 4 studios to a pretty significant pole that's embedded probably 5 to 10 feet into the ground. So, like I said, the tennis courts, baseball backstops, different things of that nature. Just really have an eye for those things as you're going to set up. All right? Let's get a little bit, yes, Rick?
One last question,
Yeah,
not
okay.
question, but it's pretty much imperative that we do a tent and we do this every single time. It's not, oh, the wind's not blowing today, we're just gonna put weights on.
No,
You
no,
secure
this,
this
I'm
thing down
yeah,
from
this
the
one
minute
I'm going with right here and now. Okay? This is how you set up a tent. This isn't an option of how we set up a tent. I'm gonna go through right now the proper way to set up a tent. Okay? First thing I always do is I'll get my large rectangle bag and I'll grab my 4 corners. Okay? I'll set my 4 corners out to where I think my tent is going to fit, where I've identified as the space I'm going to set up my tent. Okay? I'll lay out my 4, corded poles. Hurry up, click those together. Not there. There we go.
So if you've taken one of these out for dance, be sure you put it back.
I have. This is all Dan's. Yeah, put it back. So, and then I will then put the 2 pieces for each corner in every corner, along with the weights. The 2 front corners will have about a 12-foot long rope in the front corner. The 2 front corners will have 3 stakes. The back 2 corners will have 1 stake, and the 3 enclosed sides